from her. We have two amazing panelists who are here with us. I might go first alphabetically online to Professor David Campbell, who many of you have known, who is a close member of our visual politics program, as well as of our ASC linkage project. David has a long history as a professor of international relations, has written one of some of the most influential books in our field, including his iconic Writing Security, US Foreign Policy and the Politics of Identity, which is one of sort of the cornerstone books of international relations. But David has also moved on and established sort of a parallel reputation and impact as a scholar on photojournalism. He's worked with the World Press Photo Foundation, which is a partner in our linkage grant, and is at the moment Director of Education at the Seven Foundation. So David will use his expertise coming from both politics and visual journalism to comment on AI, about which he has written about as well. We also have with us Dr. T.J. Thompson, who is as well a person who has been loyal with us for many years, has attended many events, has presented with us before his book To See and Be Seen about 3 or 4 years ago, I think. TJ is an ASC DECRA fellow and a lecturer in visual communications at RMIT. He moved down from QUT to RMIT. And we're equally pleased to have you back. So thanks, TJ. Thanks, David. The format is each of the panelists will start with an opening sort of statement, about 5 minutes, and then Bronte and I will ask a few questions. We'll have them elaborate on a few things for about half an hour altogether. In the second half hour, we bring everyone here in and everyone online. We record the first half hour, and then afterwards we stop the recording for people, copyright reasons and other reasons. But I might, on that note, then hand over to David, if okay, for a few.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Roland. Thanks, Bronte. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I just wanted to take a few minutes really to kind of set the conversation in context. We've been doing quite a bit of research on AI at the Seven Foundation. It obviously impacts on photojournalism and visual journalism pretty extensively. But I think in the last couple of years, when AI has, become a central part of public discourse, it's also become a slightly cliched umbrella term to incorporate a huge array of rather disparate technologies. I mean, we've all been using AI, inverted commas, for some time. Every time we use a spell checker, a transcription service, a translation service, or your smartphone prompts you with the autocorrect and the next word in a sentence, you have actually, quote, been using AI. Every time you log on to a website and you see one of those recapture images for security, and it says, click on this, click on the number of buses in this grid and so on, and you try and identify the buses, you've actually been training an AI model for Google and other people to recognize this. And I was struck recently by someone who called AI the oldest new technology, because this technology of machine learning, which is what is happening when you're doing those recapture images and identifying things and training a model, goes back to the 1950s. It's built on, techniques for what they call natural language processing. It's developed into large language models as data sets have gotten bigger. There are diffusion models, which are important in terms of imagery. And then the big change comes around 2017 with transformer models. So ChatGPT is a generative pre-trained transformer, and that's the transformer is the architecture of the large language model. And how it operates. It's kind of mind-bendingly complex. It's well outside my comfort zone for exactly how it operates. But I think it's important to understand this sort of long history and then how it's kind of been itself transformed in the last couple of years. And one of the things that has made it appear new, of course, is what the AI companies like to call its, quote, multimodal capacity, which is exactly what Bronte referred to, the capacity to produce all forms of media, including still and moving images, audio, etc., from text prompts. So you get text to image prompts leading to the production of images. ChatGPT was released in November 2022. So only 2 years ago. That's what exploded onto the scene. OpenAI, the company behind it, expected a few thousand people to use it. Tens of millions signed up very quickly, and now it has hundreds of millions of users. Still makes a huge loss, however, for them. That has meant that generative AI, this kind of sort of current version, if you like, extremely popular. It's made it accessible, and it's appeared to be a technology that is fast, confident, and complete. But that's an appearance, and part of that appearance is because we anthropomorphize these forms of generative AI with particular language around them. You know, academics are accused of using jargon, but few people use jargon better than actually AI companies. So they like to refer to errors in the models as, quote, hallucinations, as though it's a person on drugs or something having a hallucination. And all this gives kind of a false sense of a machine that might be capable of reasoning, which of course is where they think AI might be headed, to give you know, an exact replica of a human brain or the human capacity to reason. We're a long way from that. We have the appearance of reasoning, but we don't have actual reasoning, for two facts. Again, Bronte mentioned a couple of these. The first is that behind this aura of confidence, behind this anthropomorphized sense of what large language models do, all of them depend on the data that they're trained on. And that is, you know, getting more extensive, it's getting faster, computing power is rising, etc. Huge questions there about kind of the resource, environmental, and climate implications of this. But one of the reasons why you get hallucinations, or one of the reasons why you get some really disturbing things coming out of models, is because they're trained on data that includes those disturbing things to start with. Here we're talking about the foundation models that are commercially available. And no matter what they're trained on, the way they operate is that they are still limited to matching patterns rather than answering questions. And I think they look like they answer questions because you put in a text prompt or you put in a question and you get this iteration of text coming back at you very quickly. But that iteration of text is still responding to matching of patterns in the database. Financial Times did a really good visualization of how transformer models operate recently. And they stressed in the article that large language models are not search engines looking up facts. They're pattern spotting engines that guess the next best option in a sequence. Pretty much the same also for the way they generate images too. And I think that has an impact on how we will talk about that. Now, all of that history, all the way through to transformer models and the emergence of ChatGPT, and then this the rise of text-to-image prompts, etc. In the AI lexicon, that's still what they call narrow AI, because that draws a distinction with what is the kind of, for the AI companies, the utopian dream, for some people, the dystopian dream of actually an entirely reasoning capacity in a computer, which they refer to as AGI, artificial general intelligence. We are nowhere near artificial general intelligence at this stage. Some people predict X number of years or Y number of years, we don't really know. But that would be something completely different from models that were trained on data and so on, operating within the limits of that data, and that they would have the capacity to reason. That's kind of the utopian / dystopian dream, but we're some way away from that. What is new, thinking about images, I think, is the scale of image production that is now possible through GPTs. And in that sense, they further, quote, democratized the production of memes and misleading visuals. So the potential for polluting politics is pretty great as a result. There are also, I think, some interesting creative potentials here. And we shouldn't see this as just a black and white, good versus bad consideration, because I think that we are starting to see, for example, in the documentary space, people using generative AI to imagine the visualization of things that could otherwise not be photographed. And maybe we want to come back to think about what could be the the options there, and as Bronte said at the beginning, what would be the ethical way of doing that. However, kind of the negative things do gain the most attention. Of course, the most obvious thing is that we have sort of an explosion of misogynist deepfake revenge porn, which is probably one of the biggest AI problems that exist, all ranging from high school students all the way to workplaces. And now we're seeing what is being referred to as AI slop, which is kind of the AI version of spam, which is low quality media that floods the information space when a particular issue arises. So there's been a lot of commentary in the United States following the hurricanes in Florida and so on about the kind of imagery that's been produced, supposedly detailing what is or what is not happening in the recovery after those hurricanes. And that, I think, is, kind of a huge potential problem. But I don't think we're doomed. For two reasons, and I want to finish with these 2 points so that then we can pursue some more debate later. We're not doomed for some demand issues, and a lot of things in the misinformation, disinformation, information pollution space, are based on kind of demand, what people want. I think there is actually a demand for authentic imagery and authentic journalism. And if you looked at something like the Reuters Institute Digital News Report this year, global survey, around 60% of respondents globally said they were concerned about what is real or fake online. So I think there is something to build on there. People don't want to be misled generally. Of course, the definition of what is misleading is open for debate. And the second reason we're not doomed, I think, are supply issues, which is that in the end, large language models and transformer models need good data to be trained on. And at the moment, they've not really had good data because they've scraped existing things off the web and so on. And Hani Farid and a colleague at Berkeley published a paper just before Christmas, which I think contains some of the best news we've had, which is that when models are trained on AI-generated imagery, they break down and they produce completely worthless, useless, hopeless imagery. It's just not functional. And so they referred to in this research that introducing AI-generated imagery into the training data set was like introducing poison into the data set, and the models collapsed, which means that in the end, the models will require good and authentic imagery to be trained on to produce something worthwhile, however you're going to use it at the end. And certainly, obviously, for those of us who are working with photojournalists and visual journalists, that's an extremely encouraging point, and I don't think we're yet to appreciate the full implications of that. So I'll finish there, hand over to you guys, and then look forward to some questions afterwards.
Thanks very much, David. We'll hand over to TJ.
Thank you, Dave, for that helpful contextual overview. Very, very nice to get that kind of historical context going on. That's wonderful. Bronte, Roland, Cormac, thank you for your time and effort organizing today's session. And Roland for organizing the Visual Politics program to have these conversations. It's a wonderful vehicle for these types of discussions. I'd like to provide 3 examples about how AI matters most to visual politics, drawing on some recent field work I was doing in Germany for the last 3 months, and that my collaborators here in Australia were doing as well to have kind of comparative data between Germany and Australia, regarding how news audiences, what they kind of see as the place of visual AI in journalism. That builds on the work I've been doing since 2022, looking at AI-generated content in journalism. Last year, the focus was on AI use in newsrooms and what practitioners are doing in that space. And this year, trying to just pivot a little bit to the audience perspective and see how audiences are seeing how AI should or should not be used in journalism. So 3 examples. The first example is control of privacy. And this stems from a feature that many of us have on our smartphones. So if you look at your camera rolls, you can very easily search now your images by keywords. You can also look at your gallery through particular people's faces, or through like a pet. You can find images of all your pet's images by clicking on the little icon of their pet or your partner or whoever is represented a lot in your camera roll. So the folks I was speaking to in Germany were a little bit concerned with this kind of thing happening. They like it themselves as a personal convenience, but when you think about journalists and news organizations that have this massive archive of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or even more images, if you start trying to apply AI to archiving processes, you can kind of see there could be some privacy implications there with recognizing people in places and contexts, that kind of thing. I'm a former photojournalist myself, and I can appreciate the labor that goes into keywording and captioning and getting metadata into images and assets. So I think there's a really nice efficiency potential there, but also there's a really good opportunity to be ensuring that we're ethical with how we use AI tools, so they're not being used for ill purposes or non-positive purposes. So I think the first example, control privacy, was a nice thing from those interviews that I was doing. Second kind of example, control of emotions. Is a referent to recent phenomenon in a lot of different countries, from Greece, India, Kuwait, South Korea, Taiwan, the US. All these countries have started experimenting with virtual AI news presenters. So you can have basically a robot present the news to you instead of having a human present the news to you. Many of the folks I was speaking to were concerned with the potential for job loss with the use of AI in this way, but many were also concerned that the use of AI in this way felt unnatural, and that AI couldn't deliver the human qualities like humor, adaptability, and empathy that they enjoyed in their favorite anchors or news presenters. They've had relationships with these people, kind of parasocial relationships with these presenters over many years, watching them on television or on a screen, and you don't really get that same kind of connection with a robot or an AI presenter. If I can just briefly quote from one of my participants' words, she says, "I think it's actually quite a shame using virtual AI presenters because I miss the likable human component. I somehow have to think of people like Suzanne Dobner in Germany, who always has very extremely charming fits of laughter, and that's how it makes it likable and human, despite all the seriousness that is supposed to prevail on TV there." And I think, well, you can see there that the people are standing there together in this TV studio, and that there really is, that you have this feeling that it's somehow real. So I'm a fan of digitalization and simplification and many steps and that kind of thing. I also like to use a wide variety of things, but I don't think it's good when people are somehow completely abolished in every nook and cranny. That would actually be a bit too much for me. And then in my last minute and a half of my 5 minutes, I might provide a third example, which I'm calling control of authenticity. And it relates to examples of how generative AI can be used in journalism, both in the past as well as in the present. So in the past, you can use AI to try to visualize history, visualize past events before the invention of photography. You can say, show me what Australia looked like in the 1700s, for example, or what AI thinks Australia looked like in the 1700s. Some folks were kind of comfortable with this and said it was not really different than having an illustrator in a history book kind of draw you or paint you an illustration. But some folks said AI doesn't really understand too well cultural context. And so perhaps we don't really want to be getting AI to visualize things that who knows what look like really without that really deep knowledge and cultural context. So that was kind of an issue for some folks there. More recent examples, using AI to edit images. We saw this happening with 9 News in Victoria, with Georgie Purcell, the federal MP there, using AI to edit her little headshot, make it a larger image, and Photoshop imagined her wearing a midriff, a dress that had a revealed midriff. And so that's kind of speaking to the sexualized nature of some training models and data sets that we have perhaps in our big repository of images online. So some kind of things to think about in terms of controlling privacy, controlling authenticity, and controlling emotions with AI in journalism.
Thanks, TJ, and thanks, David. There's already so many different kind of topics, issues that have come up in your 2 presentations on both the kind of the problem, the illusion of reasoning, the lack of authenticity, and so on, the potentials of it, of visualizing things that we cannot do through photography, and so on. So I was trying maybe to sort of focus our discussion a bit and look more specifically at the visual dimensions of AI. In a sense, a lot of the discussions have been on the verbal dimensions, and certainly for us university teachers, we always think of AI as a plagiarism tool, and so we focus very much on the verbal dimensions of AI. So maybe if both David and TJ can say a few words about the specific, not the multimodal nation, but what is the visual element of AI, and what makes that particularly important? What's sort of really the political significance of the visual dimensions of AI? Anything you want to sort of highlight on that issue? David, did you want to have a first go?
Well, I think 2 things. One is, what I refer to as the democratization, which, is both positive, but means that as with all these technologies, what is happening is that things that would have taken a long time to produce and required a high level of skill to produce. So if you were, a bad actor wanting to produce misleading video or whatever a few years ago, that would be kind of a very complex operation. Now with GPTs, that with text to image prompts and, the quality of video that can be outputted from this, that's now going to be much more readily available, much cheaper, much faster, and so on. A footnote to that, though, is that, of course, a lot of people prophesized that this year, 2024, which had more democratic elections in it than any other year in recent history, we were going to see, elections, greatly perverted by a proliferation of these sorts of technologies. And fingers crossed, so far, I don't think there has been examples of these technologies, changing electoral outcomes or massively influencing kind of the way that political discourse has been going in these. I say fingers crossed because we haven't got through the US presidential election on the 5th of November yet, and there's still time. Most of the misleading things that are being produced, say in the US, for example, are actually people confirming their own beliefs or and whatever. They're not changing people's minds or directions on that. But this democratization, I think, is a huge thing. And, people are referring to the way in which these GPTs allow you to produce, high quality visual memes, for example. And there's also, I think, a distinction between meme and misleading that we might want to explore at some point. In ways that don't require skills. So I think that's one of the big developments there. Behind and then of course it's the photorealistic nature of the images that are made possible by text to image prompts. I mean, they are pretty extraordinary in many cases. You do find errors, mistakes, and so on, because they're still working on patterns and so on. But the quality of those things is extraordinary, and the video versions of these, the companies are kind of releasing teasers saying, we can now do 16-minute videos in no time and so on, but they're not publicly releasing the model because they are worried about some of the implications of letting this loose in the wild, as it were. So for me, it's the democratization of the technology and then the photorealistic outcome that are the two big things that come to visuals as potentially having an impact.
I think on this end, I would say one difference that I'm observing is that the level of context and concreteness, I would say, between AI-generated text and AI-generated visuals is different from what I'm seeing. So I can give you an example of that. I was looking at the ABC this morning. I grabbed a headline from the ABC, the first result on the page. It was, I was quite shocked, : convenience almost cost one woman $150 in card surcharges. I took that headline, I put it into Midjourney. I asked Midjourney to visualize that headline. And of course, Midjourney has to try to identify lots of things that weren't specified in that headline. So the person's age, person's gender, person's ability status, person's environment, lots of different unknowns that the AI has to kind of guess and work on and visualize, make concrete for us. And so unsurprisingly, perhaps, with that prompt, it gives you 4 options, 4 results from that prompt. All 4 had a either younger or middle-aged woman. There weren't any kind of older women in the sample of those 4 images. In all 4 cases, the woman was in an urban environment, not a regional environment, not a rural environment. So we have, I think, perhaps a little bit of unrepresentativeness in terms of age, perhaps in terms of environments, urban to regional or rural, that kind of thing. So I think that the concreteness and abstractness versus context, I think, is a bit different between how we write things and how we see them in visual form.
We might have time for one more round, Bronte.
Yeah, thank you for those responses. That was fantastic. And I guess I wanted to, ask a question, and you've both touched on it at various points throughout this roundtable around the bias present in AI visuals. It can produce quite racist, sexist, misogynist visuals, and it often relies on dominant stereotypes, especially, even with that lack of cultural understanding that you were talking about as well. It can really kind of universalize across cultures, and, and that's very much based on the way AI is trained and the data sets that it's trained on and the quality of those data sets. If it's just scraping the internet, that's going to be what's most dominantly available, and it's going to see for those patterns available in those data sets. So I guess, and in our own research on humanitarian visuals and the implications of AI for humanitarian visuals, there's research that suggests that it even reinforces those humanitarian stereotypes that we see, not being able to envisage, a white beneficiary of humanitarian aid, and really having people of colour being those beneficiaries and not being able to inverse or mitigate that pattern. So I guess, I wanted to ask what are kind of the visual and political implications of this, and if AI is mediating how we visually engage with distant events, especially through photojournalism and journalism.
A mini topic.
Yeah.
Maybe David again first, or?
Well, I mean, you kind of answered your own question in one way, Bronte, but because it's all about the data sets that it's trained on, and because it's been, scraping production that includes stereotypes, racism, gender bias, misogyny, etc. The outputs include stereotypes, racism, gender bias, misogyny, etc. What we're getting reflected back to us through some of those things is what's out there in kind of the wider knowledge universe for that. And it throws up some really extraordinary and bizarre things. So there was that case where the Google image engine was, when asked about diversity and Nazism, started outputting images of black and quote diverse Nazi stormtroopers, which of course historically did not exist in any form, because it's just going, oh, Nazi, diverse image, person of color, let's put these two things together. And that's where it's just that pattern recognition. There's no intent in the model to push a particular kind of political representation. It's just looking for patterns on these things and putting those things together. And that's why I think there's, we just have to keep repeating that point to understand the limitation of this. But in terms of humanitarian images, we're going to get an extraordinary amount of stereotypes coming back. And that, I think, is what is happening in this category that people are talking about as AI slop. So what came after the US hurricanes, the most infamous image was of a young girl cuddling a teddy bear on a boat on a flooded river. And you had senators and congressmen from the right just going, look what's happening. The Biden administration is not, responding to these particular cases. And then it was pointed out to them that this was AI generated, and they go, well, actually, I don't really care that it's AI generated. I feel that this is the truth. It's not a representation of the truth. The problem there, I think, is not so much the AI model, but actually the politician who wants to mislead and lie. And this technology is just going to, democratize that opportunity even further. Also note one particular case that was disturbing, and that was the case of Amnesty International, which used an AI-generated image of a Colombian protester to illustrate one of its human rights reports, which I thought was just they later had to apologize for it, of course, but it was just a profound mistake in the sense, A, there are plenty of authentic images of Colombian protesters that they could have drawn on. And B, if you're an organization that depends on, accuracy, verification, and truth, the idea that you're using AI-generated images in those contexts is just fatally flawed and undermines your purpose. So sometimes even the best actors, as it were, go down this mistaken road. So, the potential for misuse is huge, but then maybe we can come on a little bit later to think about, well, maybe there are some creative possibilities for visualizing things which cannot be photographed in the humanitarian space. How would we approach that ethically and well? And should we think about that opportunity?
And to build on David's excellent points, I might just also contribute. Bias, of course, can refer to identities and ethnicity and age and race and that kind of thing. It can also, I think, refer to maybe what we can call an aesthetic bias, perhaps. And so I think what can be a nice exercise for a lot of scholars and researchers in this space is we've talked a lot about text to image and prompting, that kind of thing, but kind of doing the opposite, getting AI visuals and having them describe the visuals to us. So having AI, describe through text, with image to text, or text to image, upload an image and have them describe it. I've tried to do this a little bit myself, and to see kind of visual bias in terms of aesthetics. What things is AI picking up on? What things is AI ignoring in terms of aesthetic qualities or semiotic qualities? Not necessarily qualities of who's represented in what ways, what identity attributes, but more kind of semiotic or aesthetic qualities. And again, I haven't done this systematically with millions of times, but just for my kind of casual foray into this, AI that I've played with hasn't kind of returned results about aspect ratio, which is quite important, I think. So if it's a horizontal or vertical or square image that you're uploading and having it describe, it doesn't tell you what kind of aspect ratio that the image has. So I think it's kind of an interesting, small little way that AI can be biased from my casual exploration.
Fantastic.
Look, that was fantastic. I mean, thank you both David and TJ and Bronte. We have a bit of time now for a more informal discussion.
We could take hours to answer all those really good questions. I wanted to come back to the first question in the room. I think it was Catherine. We were talking about democratization. You also mentioned homogenization. I think that's a really crucial point coming out of image production through text to image prompts and so on. There's a very good article just out in New Left Review from Julian Stalabras talking about kind of the deja vu quality of AI imagery, and I think that gets to some of those things about the aesthetic style and homogenization that's worth looking at, because I think that's a really key point. I agree with TJ in response to Erica's question. I think the chances of slowing down tech companies is 0 or less than 0. I think therefore it's on us to speed up and get across this technology and think through these things just like we're doing today. I think we have to do more of this as a result of that. I mean, after all, the US administration, the Biden administration issued a broad executive order. The EU is doing some AI regulation and tech regulation generally. But, if those entities are finding it difficult, then we're not going to be able to call much for slowing it down. I also think some of the discussion about slowing it down is based on the apocalyptic version of what I refer to as artificial general intelligence, the utopian dystopian dream. If we better understand models and their construction and their operation, we can intervene in the debate quite successfully now, both to use them a bit more creatively and also respond to them in interesting ways. Terrell's point about authenticity, I think, is a really interesting one. What are the media companies doing or not doing? The answer is not doing very much at the moment, of course. Amongst the actors that are slowest in the world are probably legacy media organizations in responding to these things. But in terms of regulation and authenticity, most of the developments are generally around the idea of transparency, disclosure, and content credentials. And there are interesting things happening in content credentials. I mean, we at the Seven Foundation partner with the Content Authenticity Initiative. I mean, Adobe, who make the tools that allow you to produce anything, also drive an initiative to set up protocols and workflows that allow you to digitally verify images and their production and what's happened to them. And there are industry standards emerging out of that media partners like the BBC, New York Times, etc., are adopting. But in the end, it will depend on how those processes are visible and understood by the audience themselves in terms of content credentials. And I think there's still some work to do on that. But overall, getting back to one of Bronte's original points, transparency is probably the key ethos here in terms of AI and using AI. Is you have to be transparent about where it's used, how it's used, and what's done. In terms of the broad question from the Hamza in Indonesia, definitely the dystopian view of the impact on world politics and so on. And there's just one thing I would caution. I don't have any particular view, as it were, about what's likely or not likely. But one thing I do caution about kind of the debate as we think about these issues is, and it's very interesting to me because one of the things I've been most concerned about is understanding how we conceptualize the relationship between imagery and impact. And that's always, in terms of photojournalistic imagery, I think has involved a lot of assumptions that are mistaken and a lot of claims about the potential impact of imagery. But I see all those things being recycled in the debate about AI. And there is an assumption that if AI images circulate and they're misleading, the political impact is going to be devastating. And it can be, it could be. I'm yet to see evidence of it actually being as devastating as the dystopian view. Maybe I'm just a little bit naive and the worst is yet to come. The worst is probably yet to come. But I think we really need to think through the relationship between image and impact in the AI debate as much as we need to think it through in every other debate we've had about imagery and photojournalism and so on. And I think the final point, someone raised a point about methodology, and I think that cropped up in one of the questions in the chat too. And I suspect this is a bit like Terrell, who's encouraging students to use this. Number one thing you should do, I think, methodologically, is go play with these tools and start to understand how they work and so on. And it's complex and it's daunting, and I don't have enough time to do it thoroughly. I want to make more time. But once you start playing with them, it's really interesting. Bearing in mind that they have an appearance of reasoning which is not actually reasoning in the way that we understand human reasoning.
Right, Bronte, would you like to?
Yes, yeah, Roland's kind of put me on the spot and said if I'd like to say a few
Because you've been
things.
thinking a lot about these issues and doing
Yes.
research on them. And
Yes, yeah, and I guess you know, there's been some amazing points raised and lots of amazing questions raised. You know, and I think it's very easy to allow this discussion to become quite dystopian, as you were saying, David. And I guess I did want to highlight that we should be thinking about, you know, potential positive and ethical use cases of, you know, using AI to create visuals and how that can be used. You know, and there's some great examples. You know, David has said that there's, in the documentary space, this has really been something that's been really forward thinking in terms of using AI technology. You know, and it's about AI also being used to expand the possibilities for visual storytelling. And in my own research, in terms of in the context of humanitarian imagery, there's a really amazing case study called Exhibit AI, and I don't know if anyone has heard of that.
Yes.
Yeah, and it really does demonstrate this. So it uses AI to visualize the experiences and testimonies of people that have been detained on Manus and Nauru Island, you know, and this wasn't possible because kind of journalistic access and kind of taking photographs on these within these detention centres is not possible. So there's that lack of you know, a visual component to these people's experiences and stories. You know, and it has brought much needed public attention to those human rights abuses within Australia's detention centres, and it's been a really powerful example of how AI can be used to you know, expand our capacity for visual storytelling.
Bronte, can I make just a brief additional point about that? Because I was going to raise that example because I think it's a really key example. What's so strong for me about that case is, first of all, as you say, it's visualizing something where there was no media access, participants did not have cameras and so on. And the imagery was generated from the written testimony of the people detained on those islands, not by inputting it and so on, but by reading that legal testimony and then creating imagery. And then that imagery was checked back with those participants to say, this is what it's going to look like. Is this how you remember it and see it and so on? So we may come to Karen's question, but that's a very different form of witnessing. But that's a witnessing using AI. And it's those two things of being grounded in testimony and checked with participant that make that, I think, an extremely ethical use.
Yeah, and what was also very powerful is that it was that really kind of revisioning how we can collaborate with subjects of you know, so, you know, of what maybe would have been photojournalism in, you know, imagery. And what was also quite amazing about that project is that they actually collaborated with a photojournalist, Ridula Amin, I think, you know, to really make sure that those were, you know, working with the subjects and with the photojournalist to make sure it was really representative of those experiences. And it kind of leads the question of, you know, these aren't authentic visuals, but they are telling authentic stories, and are being very transparent about doing so. So yeah, maybe I'll just leave it at that because we are running out of time. But
look, it's clearly we are at the very beginning of coming to terms with that, you know, not just in the hour here, but in general. And these are issues AI, all of us will have to grapple with, you know, no matter what we do in the world, whether as teachers, researchers, policy realm, you know, there's no way around it. You know, we can never avoid technology. Technology is something that's here, it's evolving, and we have to find a way of living with it. And a bit like you said, Bronte, of trying to make the best of it and trying to use its positive aspects as much as we can. I think we'll definitely have more events around that over the next couple of years because it's such an evolving topic that is of crucial importance. But then for today, I just wanted to thank both TJ and David and also Bronte for putting their time into this, but also their expertise. All three of you have done a lot of thinking, writing, reading on this, and we really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. And thanks also to everyone who has been coming here today, both in the room and online. The chat, I see, has a lot of really interesting comments there as well. So it itself has become a rich source. So thank you very much.